Good evening. Welcome to the Westborough it's been a month, 2 months. Westborough Advisory Finance Committee meeting of May 12th, 2025. This is our 28th meeting of fiscal 2025. And we have a new announcement to read because the government has updated the announcement, so that should be good. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, this meeting will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting in person or via virtual means. In-person attendance will be at Memorial Hall inside Town Hall at 34 West Main Street, and it's possible that all members of the public body may attend remotely with in-person attendance consisting of members of the public. This meeting may be accessed remotely via the Zoom link in the posted agenda. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by in-person attendance or by accessing the meeting remotely as previously noted. Additionally, the meeting will be broadcast live in real time via Verizon Channel 28, Charter Channel 192, or via Westborough TV's online platforms at westboroughTV.org and youtube.com/Westborough TV. This meeting will be recorded and live streamed by Westborough TV, and we thank them for their assistance. And I think first up, is there anybody here for public comment? Seeing none, we next move to budget transfer requests, and we should have the town manager coming in remotely. On that, we have 2 requests to deal with. The first one being an intra-department from select board wages to central purchasing for $14,000, and the second being an inter-department from police salary and wages to police expenses for $55,000. So see if, oh, I see her. We can't, you're muted, I think. There we go. Let's see if we can hear her.
Can you hear me?
Very yes. Loudly. Hold on a second. Okay, try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Great. So the first one that I'll speak to is for the central purchasing. This transfer would cover, it's largely postage that results in the need for this transfer. The stormwater bills were sent out separately, but in the future, my understanding is they're going to be on the water and sewer bills, and so that overage should not happen in the future.
Okay, any questions for Christy on this?
So do we know which wages are going unspent to be able to make this accommodation?
Due to the budget reductions for fiscal 26, we were unable to fill the management analyst position.
Thank you.
This year.
Okay. How about police?
Police. Yep. So we're looking for a total of $55,000, transferring from salary and wages to expenses. As I think you're all aware, we've had a lot of vacancies, turnover in the police department. And so when we are onboarding individuals, we have costs associated with that related to training primarily. And so the minimum cost to onboard an employee requiring academy attendance is approximately $11,500. So this is the result of needing to onboard and also having that excess in salary wages because we did have those vacancies. But in talking to the chief earlier today, it looks like we only have maybe 1 remaining vacancy at this point.
Excellent. Any questions for Christy on the second one? Okay. So why don't we you want to make the motion?
Yeah, you want to start with
sure.
essential?
Okay. Yes.
McMahon, I move to approve the transfer of $14,000 from select board wages to central purchasing.
Bradley, second.
Oh, we have nobody voting. Oh, Beth just joined us. Okay. So we start with
Ahuja, yes.
All right, Blumberg abstain.
Bradley, yes.
Brant, yes.
Chumala, yes.
Clap yes.
me.
Yeah.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Stafford, yes.
Okay, so we have 8-0-1
Yep.
with 9 present.
What did I not vote on?
A request for a transfer.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Second transfer.
McMahon, I move to transfer $55,000 from police salary and wages to police expenses.
Bradley, second.
Any other discussion? Prashant?
Ahuja, yes.
Blumberg, yes.
Bradley, yes.
Brant, yes.
Chumala, yes.
Clap yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Stafford, yes.
All right, that's 9-0-0 with 9 present. And that is it for tonight's transfers.
May I ask Chrissy a quick question? So I noticed the transfers.
Go
What,
ahead.
I should have waited till you said yes. I'm sorry. I noticed the transfers have the old seal on the paperwork. Is this just aging out paperwork, just as we transition to the new seal?
I noticed that as well, so I will talk to the finance director about that. I just was unable to get any signature from the chief by the time I noticed it, so.
Don't get him in trouble. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And, okay, so the ones I know about coming up at a future meeting is DPW Snow and Ice, which is over, as we already knew. And then DPW from I think it was a water main break or something out on Route 9. There's going to be a request for that, so we should hear that but they didn't have the numbers complete for that, so they're gonna come at one of our future meetings to deal with that. Okay.
May I ask, a water main break on Route 9 sounds like more than $200,000. Like, is it just going to be a transfer, or is it money from us, or?
We'll find out.
Okay.
I don't think we're necessarily paying for the whole thing.
Okay.
Or that whole thing. We'll
Thank
see.
you.
I just know. Okay. So coming up next, capital planning policy. Proposed amendment on energy-related projects. Our guest is Pete Dunbeck from Sustainable Westborough. Just a little background on this. Gene and I worked with Pete about a year ago, I think, when we started, talking about ways, particularly after like the fail school and other things, to start looking at things more numerically, to come to conclusions on when it makes sense to do what kind of energy systems. And Pete had some ideas. We actually used it at the library project to sort through whether we were going with a 60-ton chiller, a 30-ton chiller, or sticking with the old one. And I think it was helpful, and I think it's helpful to have a numerical method to do things, and then you could improve on it by knowing the results in future years. So when discussing that with town managers and others, it was felt that the best place to do this is through the town policies. And to that end, at the finance team meeting this month, Pete came and we kicked it around, and so we have a slightly updated draft from that. And the goal tonight is to get the AFC's opinion on this technique. I think it still needs it'll still change a little bit. Unlike most of the select board's policies, this one will go also to school committee because the school participates in the capital projects as well, so their input would be useful as well. But I'll give you the floor, Pete, for your explanation, but that's sort of the background of where we are.
Yep, that's great. So again, I'm Pete Dunbeck, Chair of Sustainable Westborough, and Walter did a great job of introducing the topic, so I'll just...
Excuse me, can his microphone be turned up, please?
Or you may just have to put it closer.
Yeah. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so, you all set? Thank you. So, thank you, Walter, for the great introduction of the topic. I'll jump right into it. So our, that's what I don't want. Oh, well. It's like they introduced this AI capability and stuff, and it's like creeping into the, and I don't know how to turn it off. Okay, pay no attention to the script on the bottom of the page. Walter introduced the topic. It's an attempt to find a way to balance the physical objectives of the town and the sustainability goals, and how do we make those decisions, and to do it in a way that would be consistent between departments, have transparency, that there's a kind of a reporting out so it's not a subjective decision, and I also think we should be consistent with Massachusetts policy-making practices, and we need buy-in from all of the town leadership organizations, including yourselves. So kind of a couple slide of conceptually, if you look at an investment and let's say arbitrarily $100,000 premium is proposed for scenario A over B, but the option B, which is the lower cost option, has 100 metric tons of CO2 in the lifetime. I think most people, even myself, want to be able to kind of look at that offhand and say which one is better. And if you kind of change the numbers and dial down the cost, you don't know where you hit the break point, and it's hard to get that balance. So the proposal is to introduce a cost of carbon. And I'm proposing we call it the Westborough internal cost of carbon. There's other terms that are called social cost of carbon that involve big complex math and are very politically subject to a lot of politics and can be adjusted up and down based on the assumptions. I think we should keep it simple and just pick a number and go with it. And I can talk more about that later if you, but basically the idea is if you have a greenhouse gas emissions, which are measured in tons of CO2 equivalent, and you multiply it times the conversion factor, the Westborough internal cost of carbon is in dollars per ton, and then you get the financial equivalent of the impact of greenhouse gas emissions. And because the emissions come out annually, the greenhouse gas emissions come out annually, the impact cost is an annual cost. So you need to then do a net present value or somehow a way to aggregate it. And I think this should be understood to be a guidance. It's not like a dark line and you can't go above or you can't go below. It's like one factor, one way to interpret the data that's being presented on a project. So the proposal is to establish a number. And I think that it should be done through the town administration, the town manager, with support of Sustainable Westborough and the sustainability coordinator and so forth that can look at what the state's doing and so forth and inform that process. But I think it's an administrative function to set the number with the approval of the select board is what I'm proposing, but I don't think it should be written into the comprehensive fiscal policy, which is a pretty stable document and it's only been revised a few times over 15 years or whatever. So I think it should be external to that, and that's what I'm proposing. So we need to modify the capital planning section of the fiscal policy. This was done in different ways. There was adding just the basic concept of considering sustainability in the objectives, and that shows up in multiple places in the document. I defined a new term, the energy-related capital projects, and say that for those energy-related capital projects, it is required that you evaluate the carbon impact using the WIC calculation, and then, of course, it's a net present value calculation off of that. In the appendix, I gave some background information and some examples, and I'll show the examples on the next couple slides. It is that's a high-level policy, so now then it needs to be implemented into the processes and forms and how the meetings are run and so forth. It needs to be put into the operation of the town decision-making. Again, it's transparent, but it's also non-binding. It's like informative, and there could be other soft data things that, like in the library case that we're going to look at in a minute, there was some program impact of taking one option over the other, so it impacted the librarian's staff plan too. So there's other soft data things, so it's part of the soup of factors that go into a decision. It's not a binding number. So in the examples that were in the appendix, I called it Project 1, so this is one project with two different scenarios, A and B, and one is more capital intensive. And embedded behind this is my spreadsheet calculations, and it has the utility cost and operational maintenance cost. And everything with the star is something that's an annual cost. So they're impacted by inflation or by changing carbon emissions in the electric grid, which is also a changing annual factor. The result of that, with the cost of carbon calculations at the bottom, there's the annual cost of the two projects vary by $5,000. And when you roll that up, the net present value varies by $67,000, so that the cash net present value would favor option A, but with the significant difference in the carbon impact, it tilts the scales toward option B. And then another case where I just changed the amount of electricity that's in the spreadsheet in option B, and I reduced it by 17,000 kilowatt hours a year. And again, this is just a concocted example, so I just picked numbers to cause the case to flip. And that impacts, the electricity impacts the utility cost, it impacts the carbon emission, and therefore the cost of carbon. So the numbers on project 2 on the right side are the numbers that change between the two project scenarios. And in the second case, option A is the lower total cost. And it basically comes down to that the cash difference was enough that even though the carbon emissions were significantly better on option B, it wasn't enough to cause the balance to flip. So these are just kind of concocted examples that I made up to demonstrate the math. Walter and I are on the library building committee, and we had a proposal. The initial proposal for the library was a 60-ton heat pump system, and the architect identified that there would be an opportunity to do a 30-ton system, which would not carry the entire load of the building, but it would be significantly cheaper. It was brought up in that discussion that maybe we should just stick to the existing chiller. But the existing chiller's got 5 to 8 years left on its life. So in calculating the 20-year net present value, the replacement cost of that chiller was added in. And as a result, the 30-ton chiller, in this case, was both lowest in cash flow as well as in the total net present value, even though the 60 ton is slightly less carbon emissions. So that was one kind of practical use case. I put it out for a test drive.
And we also looked at, we used $200 per metric ton as the cost of carbon in that, but I looked at it with no cost and with the 390, which was the largest number we had, and the conclusion was the same either way in this particular case, so it made it somewhat, but I thought the importance was having a way to even do the other, a consistent way to do the other half, even without carbon consideration is a good improvement over what I think we've been doing.
Yeah, that if you set WIX to 0, you get the cash flows only, and it showed up that was the best choice. And with WIX at $200, which I think is something I would propose to Christie as to be considered, it generated these numbers, which weren't enough difference to change the answer. So kind of our next steps is, as Walter said, we changed the document. It's been circulated now. The finance team reviewed it. Some of the department heads have seen it. We've gotten feedback from some. Really, Chris Payant has given us feedback, and I think he's a key player in this. And I'm meeting with the school team later this week, the administrative side, to get ready to go to the school committee. With that, our Christie's description of this, and she's on the meeting, so she could confirm this.
She's gone.
She's gone. Then I'll quote her. It's we're not going backward in the process. So if you guys recommend some changes, I say, oh, that's a good idea, and Christie likes it, and so forth. We just keep going forward. We're not going to loop back and keep trying to get everybody to look at one document. So the real feedback here is kind of the conceptual approach and the methodology, and then, of course, any language suggestions you have that would help it become a better policy document. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. I can put up the spreadsheets or the Word document itself if you want, but I'll start with questions.
So yeah, I just give me the feedback that I had at the finance team was one, and Pete did include this in this draft, was it was important to tell people that the lower number is the winner, because a lot of NPV calculations you want a higher number, a higher return, but in this case this is actually net present cost as opposed to
it's the net present value of the
an
cost.
investment. So that was more clearly stated in the examples this time. And I thought that we should kind of try and standardize on 20 years, which was done in the examples as well. John pointed out that there are some things that have either longer or shorter life, so you might want some flexibility and not have that in there. But I just think at some point, 20 years seems like a kind of good number, and it also is how much we usually borrow for. And I also don't want people picking arbitrary length of time to justify A or B, which way that it goes, but it might, anyway, it might make sense to keep it flexible, which is where it is now. So anybody have questions, comments? Prashant?
Thank you so much for giving this presentation. It was eye-opener to see that, okay, this is how the capital planning policy is being proposed, which is in line with the ESGs and the green emission and the initiatives that we are making. I think a couple of things just noted from the slides I had was, one was, you had mentioned a balance between the fiscal objectives as well as the sustainability plans. So how does the fiscal objectives play into the this balance act of coming up with the right cost as well as the final decision, what sort of fiscal objectives are you thinking will be making an impact on your calculations or the overall process?
So I was trying to suggest by that there are existing decision-making processes where you're trying to manage the cost to keep taxes low and all that good stuff, but also to look at the life cycle of projects and when they wear out and when do you trade off for capital investment versus lower operating costs and so forth. So all of those methodologies is what was intended to be implied by the left side of that scale. And what I'm proposing is to add to the right side the carbon emissions and try to get a balance of those. So it's, and Walter just kind of alluded to, maybe it is some new ideas in regard to how to do the fiscal side too. But my focus was on getting the balance between the two, but because it's emissions are annual, you need to have the annual utility costs, the annual other things, maintenance and inflation, so forth. So
just a follow-up on that, right? Do you think that since you mentioned left and right, the left side would also impact the right side, because in a time when the fiscal objective is to lower the property tax, maybe the cost aspect or maybe the tenure aspect, like, to what point in time do you consider the benefits will matter a lot as well when you're doing this calculation, because if maybe you want to put another factor to it, which is, I'm not wanting to go down into how you establish the cost, but then I guess the point is, just to follow up on that, fiscal objectives may matter when you're calculating the cost as well in terms of what the current situation of the town is.
I'm not sure I understood all of what you were asking, but let me try and then come back. I think that the internal cost of carbon should be a pretty stable number, but I do recognize that there are certain periods of time where budgets are tighter. Exactly. So I think because I'm recommending this to be guidance, you may say, I recognize that the balance is saying we should be doing the lowest carbon one, but budgets are really bad this year, and we're going to avoid the capital investment costs this time. It's a 15-year life cycle. We'll try to get it next time. So I think that's prudent management. But I think the WIX number itself shouldn't be, well, Trump just did this, we're going to make it $280 instead of $200. It shouldn't be that type of a dynamic. The judgment applied to it, I think, could be, sensitive to current politics. If you, the fiscal concerns of the town and taxpayers like me.
Yeah.
So it's a data point, because sometimes it's way this way obvious, sometimes way that way obvious, and it's in the middle. Then you're not gonna make a huge difference either way. So you got to make that judgment.
Yeah.
Based on other factors.
And sorry, one other question I had was in the establishment of this, I guess a committee which will be coming up with this cost of emissions. What is the constitution going to be like for this committee?
But I think, to speak for, right now it says in this document that it's basically the town manager, and she consults with Sustainable Westborough to get the data. I think at the finance team, we think that it may also have to include someone from the schools, since they're also involved and also do a lot of these projects. So that isn't exactly figured out. I mean, it says in the document right now, town manager and consult, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, can I ask one question?
Sure.
Is there a procedure for reevaluating this factor that you decided, like, is it set on a timeline of every 3 years, will we adjust it, or every 5 years? Because that factor seems like it's got a lot of play.
I think it's a good question, and at the bottom of the next step slides was the notion of we're starting something new, and we shouldn't assume we're going to get it perfect the first time out the chute. So we should try to assess the effectiveness of it and adjust when needed. So I do think that we'll learn a lot by just trying it for 4 or 5 projects. And we may find that 200 isn't the, I keep saying 200. Christie's going to tell us the number, and we may find the number that she picks is either not effective, and when I say effective, it doesn't provide the balance. It's not a good balance point.
I think you told, or when we met last year,
Yep.
I think that one of the things we talked about was trying to track the data on this as you move forward and see how accurate
Yeah.
the model
Yeah.
is. Would allow one to improve the model, say 10 years from now, if you track 3 or 4 different things. Because beyond the cost of carbon in that spreadsheet for like the library, there's probably 17 other assumptions on cost of fuel, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. Cost of the loan, cost of the, so unless you sort of follow that along, you could improve those things. And so that's where I kind of view it as we're adding, this is another item on the list, but to use this NPV method on projects as a whole, I think you'd get better at it after a number of years.
So is there?
I shouldn't, the chair should have recognized it.
I'm talking before he's even.
Go ahead. We're having a friendly
Thank you.
discussion.
So is there some documentation that provides the legitimacy of the WIC number at all? Just the science behind how that number is arrived at?
So I can a backup slide. So if you want to go look at some videos, there's a social cost of carbon kind of 101 video, and then there's like an hour-long debate among economists and social scientists and stuff that's really a deep dive, but it gives you some of the nuance of how difficult it is to make precise assumptions. I found a paper that estimated it should be $1,000. In 2022, the Biden administration set it to 190. Trump's recently,
390, wasn't it? 390?
No, the Biden administration and the federal EPA set it to 190.
Yeah.
Trump's recently said it's not a pollutant, so therefore basically set it to 0. What Walter
Maybe it
was
was the
alluding
state.
to in the state analysis, where we have a mandate to meet certain carbon emissions goals, they set it over 390, 392, I think was the number. And so my 200 was an attempt to say, it's not we're not going to start at some outrageously high number, because I think it would kind of undercut the feeling of integrity and balance. So I think maybe a 200 is a good place to start. Maybe some 150. I don't know. I kind of don't care. I just think doing it with some rigor and consistency will get better and learn. And I can send you a bunch more white papers and documents if you want to go read about it.
I appreciate that. I'm sorry I didn't see this slide. I wouldn't have asked the question.
This was my backups.
Oh, it was. Oh, thank goodness.
You
Okay.
didn't see this one yet. You weren't
You
happy.
were listening to it. What were you doing?
And so so you can do this social cost of carbon, which is this complex math, you get into questions, what's the value of a human life? If 100,000 people are going to die, how much cost do you assign to that? What if the people are in Westborough? What if they're in the United States? What if they're in some poor African or Asian country? You assign the same, they come up with answers to that. How much value to assign? And they try to do it on a capital productivity, gross domestic product type calculation, because it's very focused on what is the economic impact to society of more carbon emissions. And I don't think we should get in the middle of any of that. So my proposal is establish one that we think it's going to achieve our goal, which is net zero in 2050. test drive it, and then adjust it up and down. If we're finding that it's too burdensome on taxes, dial it down a little bit. If we're finding we're not making our progress on our goal, dial it up a little bit, and just use a learning process to dial in the right number. The stuff at the top kind of helps inform a starting point, but I don't think we should try to track the politics.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I did have one other question. So this deals with carbon, but that's obviously not the only, actually greenhouse gases, so specifically. But there's things like tonnage of trash or microplastics if it's water-based. I mean, any water project will have very, very little impact on this, I'd imagine. So is the stated goal really to deal with what this is a first slice as we started bracing it, or is this catch just about everything?
No, this is very much focused on climate change and carbon emissions. It is all greenhouse gases, so that's what the E is, CO2 equivalent. So nitrous oxide, sulfur hexafluoride, these other greenhouse gases get converted into the CO2e. But it's not water pollutants or diesel trucks that put out particulates PM2, 2.5, that cause asthma and so forth. It's not trying to track those. I don't think I'm not proposing we go and try to track all of those out mathematically. I'm just focused on the climate change issue.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Comments? Questions? Go ahead.
So, I agree in principle of what you're trying to do. My only concern is making it a policy. And I think it's a nice role for Sustainable Westborough to be tracking those types of things. I'm not sure I want the town manager, it's like the person who's making those judgments. Even if it's just a guide and non-binding, sometimes those things become more binding than they should be.
Okay, I think it's the goals for net zero 2050 isn't a sustainable Westborough goal. It's a town-wide goal that was adopted by the select board, and it is my feeling that every department head, every decision should be understanding whether you're impacting or not that goal. And Sustainable Westborough isn't in all those department meetings. We're not in the AFC meetings when these things are being discussed. So I think it needs to be inculcated across the scope of where decisions get made in town government.
So, okay. I agree. I think that I think having the data, having a methodical way to look at it and assess it is as close to a necessity as you can get without it being a necessity. The one thing I'm struggling with is we're tying the cost, the analysis in how we're evaluating and saying something makes sense monetarily with the social cost of carbon analysis, which is something that is an evaluation dealing with the fallout from having carbon or CO2 equivalent emissions. I'm not sure that I see those two as fungible. I think that they could be informative and they play in the same arena, but they're not causative of one another.
I don't understand what you said.
The analysis right here is giving a NPV based on this Westborough internal cost of carbon, but when you're looking at it, the actual calculation would be more probably appropriate to look at the actual cash NPV and then divide that by the carbon that's output or the savings, the difference, because the cash outlay is not going to change depending on how much carbon we're putting out. So the cost to the town is actually the dollar value. So the difference in the two divided by the tonnage difference is really the premium that the town is looking at paying to reduce that amount.
I understand. Pollution in general, and in this case, carbon emissions, is an externality to the decision-making process. It's non-economic. And so this is an attempt of how to put an equivalency so that you can make a balanced decision between the two goals, the external cost of carbon and the internal cash flow, taxes, and so forth. So it is, and I tried to emphasize what's cash and what's not cash. And yes, the carbon net present value is, nobody's writing checks on that. It's people suffering, it's medical bills, it's deaths, it's other things.
Yeah.
It's external.
And I'm not trying to argue against figuring out how to do it well. It's more that what we're talking about is, what does the town really think is the appropriate number to value to save that ton of
Yes, and that's what this is.
and well, not quite, because even if we just use the WIC, it's a standard static number across the entirety of the investment, which is not the same as the cash outlay. The
So
option
you're saying
B
we
is
should
much
only
more
look at the cash
front load.
outlay and not the
Well, you could
annual-
look at the difference in the NPV, which normalizes it to the current investable year.
So if option 1 is $20,000 more than option 2, for that $20,000, I save X amount of carbon emissions, and is it worth that savings? I see what you're saying, right? And so I think this is sort of a generally accepted way of doing it, but you're right. Rather than say, I think that this is an attempt to put it in monetary funds where we can all sort of evaluate the priorities, but you're right, sort of the raw data saying, here's the emissions, here's the additional cost. For an extra $20,000, do you want to save X number, right?
And you could come up with that same WIC type number.
Mm-hmm.
It would be more tangible, though, because it's actually aligning with where the money is being spent over that 20-year period. Because those cash NPVs are already brought back into $2025. So we know the difference is going to be $44,000 and change for project 1. And then you could divide it by the 100 tons. Now normalized to today's investment, this is what it's going to cost per ton to bring it down.
You divide it by the ton per year.
The carbon emissions.
Or,
You
yeah.
don't have to because it's already.
Well, if you have the whole
present
thing, but it
value.
would be, yeah,
Yeah.
you would have to change the math a little bit, but yes, you could do it that way.
I mean, you
the-
would want to do it over the life, right? Because if you're NPVing over the life, so to your point earlier, Walter, in picking a standardized time, right? If you're going to do the NPV over 20 years, you need to do the emissions over 20 years.
Correct.
And then do you discount the emissions?
I don't think you can discount
I don't-
emissions,
I mean-
right? Emission.
I think that's a different discussion and analysis. I don't know. But I just see that as because the thing, like I said, that I'm worried about is people looking at that $200 or this calculation and immediately coming to the conclusion that one is empirically better, financially speaking, when it doesn't really give them the clarity of understanding how much they're paying over those 20 years to reduce the tonnage, the premium. Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, how much are you willing to pay per ton to bring this
Let me make sure I'm
down?
understanding your point. So in this case here, option B is $44,000 more. So
Correct.
that's what you're paying to get this reduction,
Correct.
37 down to 12 tons.
We would
tons-
have to, we
tons
wouldn't
per
do
year.
that in annual, though. We'd have to
What?
gross that up for the
So
full
we could do
term.
20 times it, or we could try to net present value that number. If you did that, you would end up with a number like, in this case, 172, and I just made that up. It's going to be
Yeah.
less than 200 because 200 makes option B. So the question you're implying is, at what WIC would cause these two to end up equal, right?
Not necessarily.
Really, I think what he's saying is, so for an additional $40,000, we would save. I'm gonna use different numbers that are easier for math because everyone can watch this again later and watch me butcher math. So for $40,000, if I could save 400 tons, then my cost per ton of savings would be, right, and I think he's like, in just more simple terms, right, rather than modeling it all out, over 20 years, if it were 400 tons, then then I can quantify in real dollars how much it would
Each ton is
cost
gonna-
me to save per ton. And then I can say, I'll pay $10 a ton, or I'll pay.
Well,
It's the
10 cents a
town,
ton.
actually, so it'd be
Yeah.
much less, but yeah.
I buy that you could do that. In fact, I just did a furnace replacement, and I did exactly what you're describing on my furnace replacement. The question in the policy point of whether it should be a policy or not is what's causing people to do that? Do we have a policy that people need to do that? And the other thing is there an agreement of what our goal is? And so I think this $200 is saying our goal is to do projects that are under $200 cost per ton of emissions. And if you have one that's 220 and it's got other values, you may go ahead and do it. If it's 180, you may not do it because it has other issues going on, so it's a gray line. But I think there needs to be a line, and I think there needs to be a policy to get people to do the work.
So your thought with the setting the 200 or whatever it ends up being is really setting a target. So rather than just let's do the math to see where it shakes out, we want to define it in a specific target. But then do you worry you get into sort of a political debate over the 200 every time? Because this seems a little bit more nebulous and less straightforward than sort of Josh's suggestion. Do you get caught up in the details of how you're calculating it rather than just saying, for $1,000 I can save a ton, that seems like a good idea? Or, well, wait a second, what is this telling us, and where did the $200 come from? And I think it should be $100, for Josh thinks it should be $300.
And that's why I think it needs to be set outside the advocating department heads. I think it should be a standardized number so that we're providing consistency, because we're spending taxpayer dollars on these different projects, and we want to spend them on the ones that have the biggest impact. If we're paying a premium on any of these projects due to some carbon emission goal, we should make sure it's the project that's paying the payback, has the highest payback.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. So I totally get what you're saying. I fully understand it. It makes sense. It would be a perfectly valid way for me to look at it as well. But you'd still want a target.
Yeah, and I don't think you can not.
Wait a minute. And once you set that target, it's not all that different.
It's really not.
So like once you set that target as like, oh, well, if we're spending this much or less per ton of carbon, then it's worth it.
You're
and
biased
this much
toward
or
it.
more, it's not worth it. Then it's just semantics in terms of which model you use, right? It comes out the same. All it is arguing about what that target is. So either way, you've got that same issue, and that everyone's going to have a different level for that target. What you got to do is just give the town some direction so that they can go, all right, when we're planning these, before we bring it to town meeting, we have a sense that here's about where the appetite for the target is, and then it comes to town meeting floor and they go, no, we changed our mind. The target should be higher, lower, or the same.
We thought it was good until we saw the price tag.
Yeah. But you still need some sort of target, whether you use the model like you suggest. Well, I kind of like it, actually, especially since you came up with it on the fly. I thought it was a pretty good way to look at it. But when you get right down to it, it's kind of that.
Yeah, no,
It doesn't.
I don't
doesn't
think
really
there
matter.
doesn't need to be a target.
Yeah.
I think what is throwing me is
I get it.
this is
It's-
a linear calculation
and
of
it makes it
something
seem
where
like
the
yes,
dollars
100%.
are not linear.
Right.
So why not just normalize it to
Yeah, yeah.
today's dollars, and
Yep.
then you can not only have a an analytical way to arrive at that number without imputing a value arbitrarily, and see what it shakes out to be, and then we establish use historical data. And
So in your scenario, would you, if you had 20 years as the evaluation period, so 20 years of carbon emissions, it would be just the summation of 20 years times these numbers? No discounting for future emissions that are 20 years from now would count the same as emissions this year?
well, I mean, like I said, I think that is how the carbon emissions would be discounted would be. We would have to do an I mean, I don't know.
That's what
I don't
that's
have
what this is doing, though.
the
Part of it
I
is
don't thi-
part.
you're still aggregating your carbon emissions here and dividing it to be annualized, right?
Are you NPVing the carbon emissions?
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
out years or.
I
yeah.
mean,
This row right here is the net present value of carbon emissions.
What are you using as your?
You convert the carbon emissions to cash first, to a
So
dollar
you're
value, and then you're
using your
discounting
cost
the
of
dollar
capital
value.
to discount
That's
your
with-
carbon emissions. I mean,
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, it's a.
sometimes
It's
Josh,
a.
like it's a little bit of an arbitrary made-up
Yep.
number anyway,
Yep.
and so
if we
divide
have a
the
way to,
total
It's
and that's why-
because dollars become less valuable in the model, so that's why it's.
which is exactly why I'm saying to do it using the MPVs, because
But that's what he's doing.
no, not of the something
Not
that
of the
we
carbon.
don't have a value
Of the
for,
actual cash flow.
because
Yeah.
of the fact that the spend under A and B are not linear.
Yeah, so I would NPV the cash because $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow because I can invest $1 today, right? I mean, there's a reason why we NPV cash. I don't know that I get NPVing carbon because it's just as toxic today as it is tomorrow, and it's not like there's some inherent benefit in delaying emissions for a year. I'm not investing my emissions in getting more clean air and
Yeah.
like it doesn't have the same logic behind it. The accountant in me has a hard time with the NPVing of carbon. I would argue you NPV the cash, you calculate the net difference between your project's NPV cost, and you divide the net tonnage, or the total gross, not net, your gross tonnage, by the cost difference and say, for the more efficient project, it would cost me $1 per ton. Do you want to do, because yes, that I for sure want to do, $1 per ton, I'm in.
Depending on how many tons you have.
I mean, it seems like you still got to pick a value
Okay,
that,
you're-
per ton that you're happy with. But, go back over here, and then we're going to wrap this up pretty soon.
So the first thing is the Trojan horse to this conversation is that we're looking at projects, capital projects, as 20 years, loaded costs, NPVing. That's kind of cool. Never mind the environmental stuff. So I'll get to that in a second. So I'm really excited about that as a Trojan horse.
too.
Very cool idea. The second thing, though, about the costs is that I think we're overselling like the impact of what those amounts will be. And I think that the dollar value of what we're buying may have more impact. But the fact is, $175,000 in this example, there's a $175,000 difference. That's going to drive the determination of how you're going to be spending, or the total cost, actual cost is going to drive the spend more than a couple of $1,000s at the very end. So I have a feeling that this, any calculation, any number we arrive at, there's sort of a face punch impact that'll be a difference. If something is hugely significantly different, then that value will be worth calculating. How will we get to that number? But in most cases, like the other example you gave, it was irrelevant. It was a non-factor in the calculations. And I would argue even in this case, it's not that relevant. You know, we're pretending it rounds to the next 4,000, 5,000. That's not true. It's just a guess. It's a round number. I would even say that a single number is not the best bet. Maybe it should be like 190 to 210, and you look at sort of an estimate. But all of that notwithstanding, I'm not sure that number is going to play as much of an impact in most projects as we think. So,
Adam?
Just maybe one comment to what we were discussing. I kind of just like your idea. Going back to the principles, the downside of that model is that it dilutes or distorts the economic benefits of that investment. So I understand the spirit behind it, and I think we should look at both economic investment, economic benefits and costs of investment, as well as environmental costs of the investments. But I would much rather look at it in a way that let's quantify what is the cost of option A and B purely from economical standpoint.
So that's what this
Then-
is. That's what this is right here.
Exactly. So that's what you have in there. And then interesting question is how much are we willing to pay for this CO2 tonnage reduction? In terms of the goals, you mentioned we already have a goal by 2050, right, for the Westborough. So the question is, how do we get there? And if the decision is that we need to reduce CO2 by X amount going forward, we know what the goal is. The question is how much it's going to cost us. And having this economic calculation, so what the line that you were showing, the third one from the bottom, tells us specifically how much it's going to cost. When we start introducing the WIC, which is somewhat arbitrary number because we don't know if it's 190, 100, 200, 1,000, we don't know what that is. It distorts the economic view of the investment. And that's the downside of the model that we have here.
Okay, so I'd like to give some feedback then to Pete. So I'd like to I'll sort of divide roughly into two. Is whether let's just raise your hand if you're in favor of doing it more in the Josh method, which was loosely speaking, you calculate the dollars and then you divide by the carbon and you see how much the carbon costs you versus this calculated cost of carbon method. My sense right now is the majority favor that, but
So you're asking for Josh's method?
I want to sort between the two to get your
Yeah.
opinion, because this will be fed back to Sustainable Westborough, to the select board, and to the school committee. The majority of the people in this group felt we should do it A versus B. So if people are willing, I don't think we need a formal
Yeah.
motion.
The Josh method.
The Josh method.
You can call it whatever.
Patent pending.
We'll call him Josh. Josh dollars.
Yeah, same.
Are we taking a vote?
Yeah, I guess we could just take a vote on. Well, we can.
Can I ask Beth?
Yeah, Beth, how do you feel about it? You're the
I
only
mean,
one.
I sort of put something in the notation that says that, you know, it'll be reviewed in 3 years or 5 years or 7 projects, because I feel like that's an important part of this. But I understand it's a working document, and it sounds like it's gonna get changed regardless of whether or not it's written down.
Sound like abstain to me.
Okay, but did you have an opinion on the methodology?
It's, at the end of the day, it sounded like they just picked a fudge factor. And they're applying a fudge factor. So I don't really care.
So
Okay,
Got
A,
that
B, or
as-
I don't care. I mean,
A, B,
we
or-
have a,
yeah, okay. All right,
Same.
okay. So that, and just those who would prefer to do it the way that Pete presented, I guess, is first. Raise your hand. I'll throw a vote in for you, Pete.
Wait, wait.
Just so you don't feel
Good
screwed.
Josh, you won us all over. That was
Okay.
sweet.
And then those that prefer to do it in a calculate the cost, but then see how much carbon you're saving.
I think that resonates.
Agreed.
Where are you? Oh, what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And where are you?
My hand is raised.
So I don't really.
Oh, you agreed to
You
that?
moved right over.
Okay,
Yeah.
7.
Because that's a calculation, I'm
I
sorry.
don't care. You can vote. abstain, or you-
I mean,
they're very
I'm not-
similar,
yeah,
honestly.
At the end of the day,
I
if
think
you
the
have
number
a
you're
target,
gonna-
they're the same.
Yeah.
It's just a different methodology to get to the same idea. So, from that perspective, I don't really care. On the other hand, I don't think we're being asked to propose an alternative way to do this. So I don't. I could be
Feedback
wrong, but I'm not sure the Josh method is an option, frankly.
Feedback is
It may
feedback.
not be, but
Yeah, but it's feedback.
But you're providing feedback on whether you
Yeah,
would support this change to policy.
Yeah.
Or use it.
Yeah.
Or something.
Well, if that's a different question then.
That is-
So I would support
Okay.
the change in
I
policy.
think that either are acceptable. I just think My thought is, well,
I'm just trying to move
We
us on.
just
So
said-
I wanted to get us to a place where we gave feedback.
could make
and-
a recommendation,
Yes, and we
yeah.
could also take a vote. Would you, so if this was your only choice, would you support using this?
this, if it's our only choice, sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we need a
Nope.
bigger number of people saying that.
I just am concerned that it would be less intuitive to people, and that's sort of my thought, right? And I worry that while we've spent the last 45 minutes or whatever just talking through it with Pete, and we all might understand it, I think you're going to get too many people in town that say, well, what does the $200 mean, and what is...
Oh, yeah, no
And-
one's going to understand
And
this.
so I think that we're going to get hung up on the semantics of the method because it's less clear, and that's what worries me. And so maybe it's a question of, if we want to use this method, can we present the 200 in a different way that is, right, maybe we just call it our target break-even point, or I don't know, right? I mean, and maybe there's some different,
That's why I called it the internal cost. It's just our internal number for tracking this. It's not based on social cost of carbon studies and all that other stuff. In it,
In essence, when you do, for lack of a better way, the Josh method, word for it, you're going to come out with a number that's going to be 100, 500, 800
but you don't have
dollars per
Ton.
and then you're going to have, then that would leave it to the person to decide. But if you ended up with a threshold,
you're still going
I
to
just
need.
see like you like not mixing the
Yeah.
dollars with the donuts, basically.
Yes, and part of it is like I said, I
And
think
then
it's
you can
our
pick
like
your
we're
own
looking
level.
at it and something that's going to be presented to the town. The town should know this is the premium they're paying on a project.
See,
to-
I don't think, this isn't, I'm not suggesting this is town meeting discussion. I don't think we go to town meeting and say, we looked at chillers and made this trade-off. It's like there's a proposal in the process has done its due diligence and your review and stuff, and people are recommending, yes, approve project one, and the cost is $450,000 or whatever for column B. And the methodology included the net present value of all the utility bills and the debt service and whatever. So the proposal at town meeting isn't going to be talking about internal cost of carbon calculations. I don't see that happening.
Sure, but the policy would be informed by what we think the town they think is
We-
acceptable as a premium to pay.
Yes, yes.
And I would assume as part of that due diligence, we would be making the comparison, and that would come arguably through this committee.
Yes, it
So
would
I
be
would
in
want. I
this
mean, I would
committee.
want to
It'd
see
be in
that.
this committee, and it'd be in
So-
public forums and stuff, but town meeting couldn't deal with this.
So I want to revisit, because Rod didn't, basically said something about we shouldn't have a policy, but just look at the data. I'd like to understand how many on this committee feel that there should be, that having something like this in the policy, whether you calculate it method A or B, it's a good idea or not.
I mean,
You're
I
asking
think
for a show of hands?
Yes. So I think it's a good idea.
A policy in general,
Yeah.
correct?
Okay. And Beth?
Yeah, hand raised.
Okay. And I assume that's a no. So that 8-1, we think a policy, take that too, does have value. And it's sort of about, I don't know, Gene never got off the dime here, but it's about 7-1, that they prefer doing the calculation a different way.
Could somebody, maybe Josh, write down what your proposal is?
Sure.
Send me an
Yeah,
email.
that would be helpful.
I can put it into a similar,
Yeah.
because I think you'd come to the same,
I think you sort of do, but you're not trying to calculate. I think the attractiveness is,
there's
the other
some,
cost is a future cost. It's harder for people right now to digest this as it's an actual cost. It's the same as what I'm borrowing, but in reality, unless we accept that the cost of carbon is in some way real, then you would never make any of these choices. So I think but it does make it, I think, a little cleaner than.
It would be definitely simpler, and I agree
Yeah.
that it's simpler. Part of the discounting, net present value type discounting, is due to uncertainty of future benefits or costs.
Yeah.
And I think trying to say what the cost impact of carbon emissions 20 years from now is highly uncertain.
Yeah.
So it gets more and more uncertain. So it's the same as regard to uncertainty in regard to taxes or whatever, the debt service. How important is the debt 20 years from now? Utility bills, inflation. You got to make assumptions. All of these things require assumptions about the future. And I think the discounting is because all those assumptions get more and more skewed over time, so you discount them so that you're focused on things that you're more confident in. So I think it's appropriate to discount carbon emissions, but part of the question with you is, are you discounting your carbon emissions? And if you're not doing it in dollar terms, how are you doing it?
It's a very good question. I mean, generally speaking, with the pieces of equipment we're talking about, I would envision probably either one, their carbon emissions increasing as wear and tear occurred. They're probably getting less and less efficient during the life of the given piece of equipment. So
it depends. Electricity is getting cleaner and cleaner over time, so the electricity carbon
but the
emissions.
piece of equipment is probably getting less efficient. It's probably using more and more.
Marginally.
If it's a fossil fuel.
But-
You're saying it's energy efficiency.
Is
It
waning.
was 98% electrically efficient.
Yeah.
Now it's 92.
And
Got it.
The carbon emissions
Okay.
of electric grid is going down by
Yeah.
80% between now and 2050. The efficiency change on the electric motors and stuff is 3% change, 5% change. It's really pretty small on an electric system. Mechanical systems deteriorate more.
And to just agree with Andrew, because I like to do it when I can, the idea of doing all the capital projects with an NPV seems very good to me.
We know.
All right, thank you, Pete. I think that's all we got time for tonight. I think it was
Just good.
great discussion and interesting stuff, and thank you for bringing the point of view up, Josh, and thank you for coming and being so
Yep.
informative.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So, now we will turn over the floor to our town moderator and our boss, John Arnold, for our annual discussion on debrief on the annual town meeting and the advisory finance committee in general for the past year.
All right. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you again. I wanted to thank you all for the time and dedication for the preparation for and participation in the annual town meeting. And thanks for taking the time to speak with me individually about the town meeting and committee's work afterward. I know after 30 plus meetings in a year, squeezing in another one with me isn't necessarily your most favorite thing to do. But as usual, it was very useful for me to hear everyone's ideas and comments on the process and how we can continuously try to improve it. I'm going to break my remarks into a couple of pieces. The first one is going to talk about the remarks about the annual town meeting. So the overall consensus is that the town meeting went very well, that the committee's recommendations were heard, and that the voters appreciated the work that the committee puts into its report and recommendations. So again, thank you. We all recognize that this year's 10.5 hours without a break was pushing the limits of the voters' time and attention. However, to counter-effect that, I think people were also pleased to have completed the meeting by 7:30, and most people probably were home by 8, rather than leaving for dinner and coming back. So it's a little bit of a yin-yang thing in terms of which you want. Just a reminder that the flow of the meeting sessions relies on the will of the voters, and typically I rely on the select board to get a sense of the voters and for them to read the room in terms of if and when to break and whatever. And so any ideas that we have about things like how the flow of the meeting is are best shared with the select board as well as me. And so I plan to share what I've heard to the select board, but if you or anyone watching has any ideas, please share them with me and the select board. I did want to mention that one idea that was discussed during my discussions with members was maybe thinking about setting an expectation of having more shorter sessions to relieve the essentially very long sessions that we've had in the past few years. By having again, the voters control things, so it's a tricky proposition. But the idea would be that setting the expectations for having multiple sessions could be that we get a variety of participation. Different voters may prioritize attending different sessions. For example, just a very rough way of teasing out the idea that was talked about with one or maybe two of you, is there could be the first session could be planned just to cover the typically early items, the prior year's bills, the budget, and the capital items, and then maybe say that at some point there would be an expectation to have a break, either during the day or to even go to Monday to talk about the zoning items, the things that are typically later. So there's all the DPW and some long-term things that usually come up after the capital budget, and then there's zoning, and then of course there's the citizens petitions. So maybe those could be broken up into 2 or 3 sessions, such that we'd either have a more regulated separate sessions either on Saturday, or have a session and say, look, if we can be done by 4 in the afternoon on all the budget and the capital planning items, we don't come back Saturday night, maybe come Monday. So anyway, lots of ideas could come out of that, and a multi-session approach could be something that would be more amenable to more voters. There's lots of details that would have to be thought through. So, for instance, somebody can make a motion to take an article out of order. So it's not that this is an ultra easy thing to do. But I just wanted to mention that based on this idea, it could be worth trying to see if there's a way to find out if voters would prefer this approach to the day-long meetings that we've been having the past few years. And I'm sure there are probably other ideas worth considering too. I think one of the things we're still working through is when we move the Saturday sessions to start at 9, we've had the tendency to, rather than going from like 1 in the afternoon till 10 or 11 at night, now we go from 9 in the morning until 10 or 11 at night. And we were fortunate this year that we did away with the dinner break. We're done early, but I know there's some people who still say that they would like a break somewhere in the day, and it's a bit much to expect a lot of voters to contribute 10.5 hours of a day. Now I'll turn my attention to the committee's process and work, probably the most important thing for this. There was general consensus that the committee's work process and the work was very well done and proceeded very smoothly, and that Walter and Jean did a very good job of keeping the process organized and moving along. So thank you, Walter and Jean. I also think that everyone realizes that there's some understandable tension, for lack of a better word, between a group like the AFC that's asked to review proposals and those making the proposals. We all know some people don't like being asked questions from people with less expertise or less knowledge of their areas of expertise. And as I think everyone knows, I take the overall temperament of the committee members very seriously, since I think it plays a big role in the effectiveness in the committee and its interactions with the rest of the town's government and the community itself. I think the committee did very well this year with that, maintaining its advisory role with sometimes tough questions, but following through by demonstrating that we can all disagree at times without being disagreeable. So I want to thank all of you for your ongoing commitment to your role and your respect for the boundaries between having an advisory committee, the voters, and the rest of the town's government. Due in part, I want to point out to the committee's commitment to its role to advise voters and make recommendations. The budget approved by the voters this year was less than that originally recommended. And from what I've heard, the voters appreciated that effort. I also heard from Walter that this effort was actually mentioned at the Northborough town meeting with a comment along the lines of, Westborough was able to find some ways to trim the budget, why can't we do that? Or something along those lines. I haven't had a chance to watch that on Northborough's local cable TV, but that's the first time anyone's ever told me that the way we've done our town meeting has been mentioned in another town's town meeting. But anyway, I'll leave it to you if you want to watch that or not. I'll try to find it anyway. I think the most frequent point of discussion in my meetings was the overall feeling of AFC members that on a per article basis, especially the spending articles and the projects, are all well prepared, and the interests and concerns of the voters are recognized and taken into account by the proponents. So the work of the town and the committee in this kind of isolation continues to be very good. However, I think many of you recognize that there's more difficulty in looking at the articles more holistically, in a view that crosses the lines between articles and ends up looking at the total impact of overall spending or overall impact. The comments that I heard about this indicate that with the process for just the individual articles going along very well, there may be an appetite for the committee to talk about ways to make its recommendations to include a kind of holistic approach, and perhaps consider its view of the overall priorities and impacts of the spending that it wishes to recommend. Essentially, trying to find a way to take a big picture look at the overall recommendations to the town meeting to augment the current article-by-article recommendations that the town meeting makes. There isn't a single obvious way to do this, of course, or I'm sure it probably would have been done by now. But there were some ideas that came up during the discussions I had with you. For example, the committee could try to plan some additional time before the R&R book is complete to review the article-by-article recommendations and see if the committee would like to alter any of its recommendations once the total spending picture is better understood. Or perhaps the committee's recommendations could be augmented to indicate the committee's view of the priorities between various big-ticket items. For example, the committee may recommend the defeat of or lower spending of item A. However, if item A passes, it could offer a recommendation to defeat or lower spending on some other article, Article B, or something like that. Again, if there was an easy way to do this, I'm pretty sure you or some group before you would have done it by now. But I did want to mention that there seems to be enough interest in members of the committee to maybe have a discussion about various ideas about this concept at one of the meetings before the detailed work on the October special town meeting begins, or even between the special town meeting and the next annual town meeting. It is, of course, up to the committee. I'm just reporting what I heard when I spoke with each of you separately, but of course I remain willing to help you in any way you can to do your work. Finally, a few remarks about the committee itself. I want to conclude by offering my thanks for the dedicated work that Walter has done as chair and that Jean has done as vice chair for the past few years, and also for the work that Jean and Rod have contributed during their time on the committee. Walter has agreed to be reappointed to another term on the committee, though his time as chair has come to an end. So I'll be submitting that paperwork soon, but thank you, Walter, for all your contributions as chair. Jean and Rod have each advised me that they have other priorities in their lives right now and do not want to be reappointed to another term on the committee. I'm sure their insights and expertise will be missed, and I'd like to thank each of them for their many contributions to the committee. I'm currently talking to a few people who may be good candidates for appointment, and I hope to fill those positions in the not-too-distant future. Anyway, thanks as always for taking the time to hear and reflect what I've heard. I look forward to hearing any other additional comments and helping the committee in any way I can as we all look forward to future town meetings.
Thank you, John. Comments? Just follow up on the Northborough thing. As all you are very aware, we hear a lot from people that the grass is always greener in all these other towns and everything's great. And the other night I just happened to be something popped up on Facebook that Northborough was having their town meeting. I said, I can go to their TV and just see what it's like, it's different about it. And anyway, they had a over $1,000 tax increase coming, which I think they got into the high 90s or something. And someone ended up proposing cutting it by 15% or whatever. So there was a whole huge discussion. But someone actually did get up and say, I wish we could have done something like Westborough did and made a dent in it down to, like, say 600 something, and I was beaming. It was like, I understand that many of us had wished it was lower, but we did something, and we helped, and part of the frustration at that meeting was, it was just, well, here it is what it is. And they were even asking, how much time did you spend trying to change it? So I was just nice to see grass isn't always greener, or I guess for them, the grass is greener here in Westborough. So, I do think that. And I thought we got through all those discussions, which put a lot of pressure on us at the very end, because the budget ended up not being discussed in the beginning like it usually is, but really literally the last week or two, that this group did a great job getting through all that and getting the book out. So thank you very much. Anybody have comments, John? Consideration? No?
Thank you, John.
Made up some time in the meeting. Thanks. I'm sure there's some mistakes in here, but I'll send these along to you, Walter, to distribute to the committee in case anyone wants to remember what I said. since I talked too fast, then nobody was probably taking notes as fast as I could talk.
Oh, yeah, it's on
So-
Westborough TV.
Yeah,
We
that's
can
right, yeah.
watch again.
Yeah. So thanks again. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Right.
Watch him at half speed.
Okay, so to that end, we do need to end up coming up with a new chair and vice chair. And so I'd just like to open up that discussion a bit for comments.
If we don't tell them, can the new people become
Probably not that good. Yeah, so I don't know how to actually proceed exactly from here if no one is interested in doing it other than we will end up drawing lots or something. And I won't have my name in the bucket. But I have created a list and shared with some of you of what the tasks are involved in being chair and co-chair. I've also come up with, and I have some other ideas on how better to share the work amongst others as well as not just the chair doing everything. So I'm happy to share that with anybody that would like to do that. I will, I'll move on to the next part of what I'm doing, because if anybody have comments? Well, you two don't count.
Yeah.
Okay. On liaison reports, I just wanted to report that the finance team, which discussed the carbon stuff this month, next month, we'll be discussing our comparative towns. And John has come up with a spreadsheet that he's been working on that was based on coming up with a bunch of factors, including giving points for proximity, sorting it by number, sort of approximate budget, all these things. And so they're going to go through that method at the next meeting and come up with some recommendations. I think it was pretty clear that, maybe this list isn't perfect for doing everything, but I think the preliminary numbers I saw anyway got us to a list of towns that were far more reasonable.
This is the dashboard, correct?
They're dashboard towns, basically, yeah. I think there's a lot of appetite to have proximate towns having a higher weighting, say, and this is included in that. But he did it with a weighted sum of a whole bunch of things, but it wasn't, not a complete work, but he's going to be doing that, and then that could be presented and walked around a bit. So I think that's good. That's a good topic that people want to see. Go ahead.
Who actually gets to determine who the dashboard towns are?
Well, in this case, I don't know. Probably the finance team, which is a combination of the school committee and the town.
Okay. 'Cause
I mean, we could come up
I
with
was just
our
gonna
own
say,
ones.
yeah. Could we-
The finance committee can decide and
Well, the first,
ask for those
the first
comparisons.
dashboard had the police chief, the fire chief, the school superintendent, as well as the finance team, I believe.
Okay. Those, yeah. It is pretty clear that the first set of teams were a combination of sort of special interests, for lack of a better word, but there's 2 or 3 towns per all those groups that you just said. And it seems like the approach now is going to be more just generalized. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong if in all your comparable towns, we're like, say, one of the highest costs for schools, but we also have the highest quality schools because people decided that when they moved to Westborough, they want high quality schools. I don't think you necessarily have to pick places that are more expensive just to say that. I don't know. That's just me. I think you still gotta decide whether the expense that you wanna spend is right for you or not, it's just a relative gauge. And so, I don't know. Right now, the process would start here, and I'm sure that the school committee, the school board, and select board would have an impact. I'm sure we'll get it presented here, and you can have your opinion on how it's being calculated or the weighting as well. But my initial impression was that there are 3 or 4 of the same towns, but overall, some of the real outlier ones that people pointed to before were no longer on the list. So I think that was kind of cool. Anybody else?
For
Reports?
liaisons or for you?
No, liaison report.
So for rec commission meeting, there was a couple things. The dog park's almost going to be open. Very exciting. The parks, because there's going to be a big dog section and a little dog section. So it's going to be they're going to be rolling that out soon. There's going to be an opening, which is very exciting. They're also talking about wanting to try and plan better for some capital planning ideas. So they want to talk about having their own fund, capital stabilization fund, that they would contribute into. So this is just early discussions. So I expect they may be coming to us with questions, or we'll be able to contribute some of the thoughts into that. They're certainly talking to the finance department about that. But I think that's showing that they're trying to do a good job planning for some of the capital expenses that end up falling on other departments when they have to come to the town for it. So I appreciate their efforts in that regard. Also, the trouble with lifeguards for the pool again, or the lake again this year, so that they're struggling to figure out what they can do to keep the lake open, which is too bad because a lot of people like the lake. But there's also a more active discussion about what we can be doing to invest in the lake to get more people interested, to have a membership that, a small fee that folks could pay for the year or for, the season to go. So there's a lot of conversation about how we can build up and improve upon what we have for Lake Chauncey. So I think that was kind of interesting.
Was there any thought, they talked when they're gonna do the pool, that there was some company, for lack of a better word, that was gonna actually run the swim lessons and provide lifeguards? Is there any possibility that they could do that at Chauncey?
So for swim lessons and stuff, that is a conversation that Jen said that she was going to initiate. But the idea of staffing up for the whole facility, that would not be as practical for the beach as it would be for a smaller indoor pool where people have more more expertise and stuff. But yes, they were talking about reaching out to other groups so that they could get more people to the pool. And there's pickleball courts there as well. So there's a question of parking and the use of the space and how you can improve that and make the pond look a little bit better and more accessible. Do we keep the gate up? Do we remove the gate? There's a lot of things going around that they've been more active talking about this year than they have in years past. I don't know what traction comes of it, but it's the fact that they're actually engaging and talking to other people in ways that I haven't seen before, which is very positive. So.
Okay. Anybody else? I can tell you the library is actually got 2 more days of being open before closing for the big move. On May 15th, they'll be closed, and the move starts. And their hope is to, in early June, to reopen at the new location. And then the construction starts. Then the real fun starts. Wake up Ron early each morning with hammers banging or something like that. But that's all moving forward, and they, I believe they have the space pretty much ready to go. So that's good. Okay. All right. I have approval of minutes. March 3rd, March 6th. Oh, sorry. I want to cover meeting dates. My calendar here. Okay, so we still have to have a couple meetings in June to do some more transfers. With the Memorial Day holiday and the committee's preference for Mondays, I was going to suggest June 2nd, the next meeting, which is about 3 weeks from now. And then kind of one closer to the end of the month, maybe June 23rd, to catch any last minute stuff. One year we had a meet in early July because they're allowed to transfer all the way to, I think, July 15th or something like that. But I'm hoping to avoid the July 4th holiday and all that mess. Does that sound doable to a majority? Okay. And I think that'll be the main topic, so those meetings might be shorter than tonight. This thing sort of came up on at Monday's meeting. I guess it was last Monday's meeting, and they kind of, so I threw it in to the agenda, but it obviously added the bulk of the meeting to it. Okay, so we will need to come up with a new chair at the next meeting, and I will have to come up with a plan to do that. But given the time and I'll give you all time to think about it until next meeting. Let's see.
Otherwise, Rod and I are going to vote.
There you go, we'll decide.
That's good. So next meeting minutes, March 3rd, March 6th, March 10th. Anybody need
March
it?
6th, wait, I'm sorry, I have the date and my cat just walked in front of it, I apologize. I wanted a small change that I didn't notice until this evening, and I apologize because I'm now looking for it. I wanted Christmas trees to be switched to separation of church and state. That was my objection.
If you can send, I'll have to bring it up. Hold on.
I apologize, I have the minutes up. Oh, here it is. March 3rd.
Which day?
March 3rd.
Okay. And which page?
In the zoning bylaws.
Yeah?
It mentions Christmas trees, and I objected to the lack of separation of church and state.
Found the mention of you. Here, Ms. Blumberg agreed and feels such a proposed. No, wrong one.
No, it's right above Article 25. So I guess it's in Article 24.
Can she send in the change? We can just vote as amended.
Thank you.
If she's gonna send it to me right now, yes,
Yeah.
because I don't have time to wait for that.
So it's on
You can
page
wait for
3,
Page 3.
first paragraph, there's the motion, and then there was discussion. On the chart, it talked about Christmas trees being one of the
Okay,
uses.
motion was discussion. Mr. Shepherd said something. Ms. Bloomberg is opposed due to the Christmas tree stipulation. I think that's what you said, but you're saying you're
I was
opposed
due
to.
to the lack of separation of church and state.
Okay, that's what you want to say.
Yep.
Doesn't.
I mean, I do think that, the conversation was very specifically around Christmas trees, so we can modify it that that's the reason for the objection to Christmas trees, but I think if we drop Christmas trees from there, then the conversation becomes unclear. Because it could
Yes,
imply
I
something very
continue-
different in the paragraph if we just dropped the reference to Christmas trees.
Okay, but I specifically said I was opposed due to the lack of separation of church and state.
But I'm not objecting to adding that in. I just want to make sure that we leave the Christmas tree reference so that it's clear what we were discussing and right, because otherwise it would just, it could have been anything in there that you had an objection.
Yes.
I think we need to, because the
It was an
Christmas
example.
tree. What was that?
It was an example. The Christmas trees.
So, Ms. Blumberg citing the Christmas tree stipulation is opposed due to the lack of separation of church and state. Is that good?
Fine.
Works for me.
No, but I'll accept it.
Novo accepted?
But I will
She's
accept
she's
it.
not happy with it, but she'll
So you
accept
want to
it.
remove the word Christmas tree completely?
Yeah, that had, I mean,
Well, that was the only thing in there that you were objecting to was the inclusion of the Christmas tree, right? Sale. There was no other thing.
yeah, okay. Yes. But there was some flippant comment, I'm gonna try and be very calm about this one. There was some flippant disregard, I mean, because some people were like, it's not a religious thing, I mean,
It's not.
but yeah, I will go comfortably with, I was opposed to the lack of separation of church and state due to the inclusion of Christmas trees.
That's great.
I want to be clear about that. I'm not objecting to adding that. I just want to, because if we had dropped Christmas trees, it could have implied that there was some crazy inference in there, and I just want to make sure that people know that, like, Jenny didn't come in
Yeah,
with some
okay.
dramatic, we're going to
Right,
have.
and I get that.
Yeah.
Because this is a synopsis of
Correct.
conversation.
Yeah, and I just thought that particular fact was relevant in why you were concerned. So, okay.
Okay, very good. March 10th minutes, Rod has suggested the removal of the comments of select board member
Yeah. Select board.
Keough, which is kind of out of the blue comment.
Come up with a 1% cut, and that's what my comment was, but he was out of order.
So I don't disagree that he was out of order, but he did say it.
I'm okay.
So
I
it's-
was feeling prickly. with
So
it.
I kind of feel like, well,
He
he did say it. I agree with you. He was out of order, but it did happen in the meeting.
Yeah,
Unless
that's
we
why I
were to,
was sort
unless
of-
we were to vote to take his words down or something, I don't know why you wouldn't include it.
Other than
But
we don't
but if you
include-
wanted to vote to take his words down, I wouldn't necessarily.
We don't include every sentence everybody
No,
says
I-
in here.
I
These
know,
are
but-
kind of just mainly on the vote, so.
But we do
I
at least
think she might
include
have been-
everybody who stands up and speaks. We
Right.
include that they stood up and
And
spoke.
I think she may have included it because they included him on the guest list, so that would have been the only thing he said, maybe.
Right.
I don't know, but, so you're okay, that one is his, okay. Does anybody have other comments? These are really complicated minutes because you go back and we
Yeah.
did a lot of voting, a lot of discussion, so appreciate Laura being able to sort through this stuff even and condense a 2+ hour meeting to a few pages. Does anybody need to vote separately on any of these? Okay. All right, so let's have a motion to approve March 3rd, March 6th with, as amended, and March 10th minutes.
So moved.
Okay.
McMahon second.
Right, and that was Clapp who made the motion. Okay, we gotta do roll call.
Oja, yes.
Blumberg, yes.
Bradley, yes.
Brant, yes.
Shimano, yes.
Clap, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Yes.
All right, so that's 9-0-0, 9 present, and on all three. And I'll make sure I change the 6 before I send it back. As I've written down. Okay, anything else? Motion to adjourn, maybe?
Motion to adjourn.
Be your last.
Oja, yes.
Platt?
Yes.
Bradley, yes.
Brant, yes.
Shimano, yes.
Clap, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
900, we are adjourned. Thank you, Westborough TV.